Okay, friends. So my second lecture on the virus is again on the role of immunity and vaccination. What is how the immunity help to protect from infection, and how the vaccines is basically induce the immunity or protect the infection in the host through vaccination process. Basically, both the things are same. One is we have the natural immunity, the immunity of the host itself, and then we have induced immunity through vaccination. But try to understand that even the induced immunity is also something which improve the host immunity. The vaccine basically induce the host immunity. So the population immunity affect the disease spread. Vaccinations provide the long-lasting protection. It can prevent the epidemic nature of the disease, even through herd immunity in the whole community, or the immunity within the host itself, so that the suppression it affect the break the chain of the transmission, so that the spread can be reduced and develop a herd immunity in the whole community. When most of the population is immune, spread is limited because hosts are not responsible for spreading the infection from person to person. For example, smallpox eradicated and polio is eradicated. Effort going on to polio and measles also. The extent of host involvement, how the host is involved in basically. So local infection limited to small area, example boils, abscess, systemic like generalized infection, microorganisms spread via blood, limbs and throughout the body, example measles, and focal infections are called focal infection spread to the specific body part, sources, teeth, tonsils and sinuses. So it means you are localized infections. Then sepsis and related terms, like sepsis means like a toxic inflammatory responses from the spread of the microbes, toxins, the septicemia, the pathogens multiplying in the blood and blood poisoning, bacteremia in the blood, and then the toxemia, toxin in the blood, example tetanus, and then viremia, the viruses in the blood. So these are some terms which I use based on the different host involvement to the to acquire the infection or infective microorganisms or pathogen. What are the different type of infections? So keeping in view of all hosts and parasite interaction, the primary infections are called the initial acute illness, whereas the secondary infections are caused due to the prolonged infection, primary infections, or it may proliferate some other site we call secondary infection. So that is caused by the opportunistic path. For example, a person having AIDS, HIV infection, which is called primary infection or acute infection. But having AIDS for a long time, there may be chance of the secondary infections, or some opportunistic pathogens may also, for example, E. coli, which is not pathogenic, but they may also cause UTI infection in the AIDS patients, and it may also severe UTI infection may cause. Nephritis may be taking place, kidney can failure may be taking place because of infection. So this is all because of the opportunistic pathogens which are non-pathogen, but under the certain conditions, immunocompromised conditions or low immunity conditions of a patient because of a primary infection or primary disease, it may cause to the infection we call secondary infection. Example, pneumocystis pneumonia. The pneumocystis pneumonia in AIDS patients, I have just given an example. Streptococcal broncho pneumonia after influenza. So these are all secondary infections, which may be controlled by sometimes bacterial infection controlled by the antibiotics. Subclinical inapparent infections, no noticeable illness but pathogen present. Example, poliovirus, hepatitis A virus, and so on. Predisposing factors for diseases. What are the factors which predispose the diseases? So gender, like a woman, UTI, men, pneumonia and meningitis. Genetics, sickle cell trait, protection against malaria. So sickle cell trait lead to protection against malaria. So those who have sickle cell anemia may not have the malaria. Double genes like sickle cell disease. So a woman may have more UTI infection for the anatomical structure of the women's genital organs compared to men. Men may have more pneumonia and meningitis. The climate weather is also responsible for the respiratory diseases in winter. So change of climate, change of weather may also link to the disease. Other factors like age, young and old are more susceptible, young are less susceptible. Yeah, very youngs and very olds are more susceptible. Vaccination and herd immunity, they are interlinked. So if there's a vaccination, you may have herd immunity develop. Then nutrition, fatigue, lifestyle habits, occupations of environment is again linked with this pre-existing illness, immune disorders, chemotherapy, antigenic drift, variation in the pathogens. So antigenic drift and shift is something which is genetic changes in the viral genome, may cause some variation in the virus, may cause some new variants like influenza virus variants, like bird flu variants, you can have swine flu and so on. Development of a disease is stage of infection. So incubation period, interval between the initial infection and the first symptoms, right? This is called the incubation period. Maybe 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. And this incubation period is a very severe for the host to get infection and for the parasite to fight with the host immune system to establish the infection. Now, duration depends on the pathogens. Dose, growth, rate, host resistance. Some disease contagious even in this stage. Some disease not. It depends on the time of the incubation period. Then prodromal periods. Prodromal periods means short phase with the mild early symptoms of a disease like aches, malaise, then difficult to distinguish from other diseases because they may have some common symptoms and common signs of multiple diseases. The periods of illness, it may short period, long period, depending upon the severity of the disease, depending upon the kind of infections and type of infection. So disease is more severe, and for example, symptoms like a fever, chill, sore throat, GI upset, and lymphoadenopathy. Outcome of the disease, of the symptoms, illness is recovery if immune response succeed, or death if fail. So these are the outcome of the disease of these severe infections. Now, the period of decline. Symptoms subside, fevers, disease decreases, durations hours to days, then patients vulnerable to secondary infections. This is called the decline of infections. How infections decline can be checked. The period of convalescence is a recovery phase. Body return to the normal state. Then pathogen may still in a present and transmissible form, but it reduced the transmission rate. For example, typhoid, cholera, can spread disease for months and years. So this is the convalescence period, we call them, where the disease spread chance may take place. The spread of infection caused by these microorganisms in the host. What are the reservoirs of infections? So with definitions of these, some terminology we should understand. The continual source of infection. So there's a reservoir which carries carriers, for a period of time or over a period of time for certain microorganisms and provide the pathogens with the suitable conditions for survivals. Multiplications and transmission taking place during this. So these reservoirs are basically the site where the infection spread is quite possible through these reservoirs. It can carry the pathogens. What are the different types of reservoirs? For example, human, animals, and non-living could be reservoirs. Like non-living environmental factors can be reservoirs, like water bodies could be reservoirs. Sometimes airs could be reservoir. Various physical factors could be reservoirs. And of course, in animals and humans are definitely reservoirs. So if you talk about the human reservoirs, how the humans act as a reservoir. Humans are the main reservoir for many pathogens. For example, it can carry the pupils who harbor the pathogens but may or may not show the symptoms. So symptomatic and non-symptomatic conditions. Symptomatic carriers means it transmits during the illness. Suppose chickenpox, smallpox, measles, some influenza virus, COVID-19, right? So the person should, symptomatic carriers, it can carry with symptoms, sneezing, cough, and so on. Asymptomatic carriers means transmitted without showing any diseases, for example, tuberculosis. Apparently disease is not shown, but it can carry the microorganisms. So latent carriers means like it carry pathogen during incubation and convalescence conditions. So these are the two states where the chances of the latent carriers that could have take without showing any symptoms. It can carry for long time, over a period of time, to other pathogens, other carriers, to transmit the pathogens. Example, Borrelia pertussis fever. Immune adults can infect the unvaccinated infant. Sorry. Typhoid Mary, Salmonella typhimurium carries. Then other diseases like diphtheria, then hepatitis, gonorrhea, amoebic dysentery, and streptococcal infection. These are all examples for the reservoirs, human reservoirs, symptomatic and non-symptomatic. Now, animal reservoirs are wild domestic animals harbor pathogens transmissible to human, like zoonosis, disease that occurs in an animal but can be transmitted to human. 150, almost 150 diseases of this kind. So, disease spread through animals. Many diseases, for example, rabies through bat, then skunk, foxes, dog, right? Coyotes. Then Lyme disease is caused by field mice. Anthrax caused by avian influenza, plague, and some other diseases. They're all like examples of the disease, zoonosis disease, where the animal acts as a reservoir, as the carriers are reservoirs which can transmit the diseases. So transmission routes may be direct contact with the animals, contact with the pet waste like a little litter box, bird cage, and so on, contaminated food and water, and airborne particles from hides, fur, feathers, consumption of animal products, arthropods, vectors, fleas, ticks, and mosquitoes. Now, non-living reservoirs like a soil, water, caused by fungi, may live in ringworm, like systemic mycosis, Clostridium botulinum, botulism. Botulism is highly toxic infection, deadly infection, Clostridium tetani, tetanus infection. Water could be one thing, contaminated with the feces. Then we have pathogens like Vibrio cholera, then Cryptosporidium, diarrhea, Salmonella typhi, typhoid fever. So all these caused by the non-living reservoir through water. Food is another one under the non-living reservoirs. Improperly prepared or stored contaminated foods. Disease, you can take the example of trichinosis and salmonellosis, which is called the food poisoning, causing the food poisoning through this. Transmission of a disease. Pathogens move from reservoir, susceptible hosts, through three main routes, like contact transmission. So you have a direct contact, person to person, physical contact between source and host, could be any source. Example, touching, kissing, sexual interaction. Disease like a cold, influenza, measles, hepatitis A, then scarlet fever, syphilis, sexual just transmitted disease, gonorrhea, genital herpes, AIDS. They're all through physical interactions. Also rabies, like dog bites, anthrax, animal contact. Congenital transmission is something which is through mother to fetal, newborn via placenta or during the birth, delivery, like HIV, syphilis, rubella. Indirect contact like pathogens via fomites, like non-living objects. For example like stethoscope, bedding, carts, intubators, eating utensils, toy, money, during hospital infection, like various hospital commodities. Diseases like AIDS, hepatitis B, contaminated syringes, tetanus, MRSA, methicillin resistance, Staphylococcus aureus infection, and then impetigo. Droplet transmission, again droplet. So these are the routes and ways how disease is being transmitted. Droplets less than 1 meter travel, you're going to have a chance of through sneezing, influenza, pneumonia, pertussis, whooping cough, called cough influenza, talking. Now vehicle transmission via medium, air, water, food, fluid, trucks. Even traveling is one of the things where you can travel from in plane, air-conditioned buses and trains. You have a chance of transmission from person to person sitting in these vehicles. Now airborne droplet does 1 meter travel. You can like droplet remain airborne for long periods, and it can carry the pathogens from, just like during COVID-19, droplet is one of the reasons, and that's how the masks were used to protect these droplets. Measles, tuberculosis, then histoplasmosis, and then coccidioidomycosis, and blastomycosis. Dust can carry the staphylococcus and streptococcus bacterial species. Waterborne is contaminated with the untreated sewage, disease, cholera, then shigellosis and leptospiriosis by leptospira. Foodborne diseases like improper cooking, unsanitary preparations, unhygienic conditions are cause the infection. Food poisoning, tapeworms could be cross contaminations, transfer of the pathogens between the raw and ready to eat foods. So many like raw meat, juices, contaminated salad, involve fecal oral cycles, like especially in the kids, may cause some kind of infection. So these are some routes where the transmission of the microorganisms or of the pathogens may take place. Vector transmission are called animal species like insect that transmits the pathogens between the host, and types like mechanical transmissions, passive transfer pathogens by feed, body, insect. Example, houseflies spreading the typhoids and shigellosis. Biological transmissions like active process pathogen reproduces are developed in a vector. So these are the vector-borne diseases. A vector is a transmissible vehicle, or it can carry from disease from one person to another person, and so on. The biological transmission, something which called active process. Pathogen reproduces are developed in a vector, and arthropod bite hosts inject the pathogen via saliva, feces or vomit. Then mosquitoes, malaria, dengue, Zika viruses. Then we have sea flies in African sleeping sickness. Then flea plagues, tick, lymph diseases, and Rocky Mountain spotted fevers. Now this is a table to show all these diseases. So you can go through this table. So this is I'll show the book, the reference of the book chapter. We have taken this table. The malaria, African trypanosoma, trypanosoma diseases, trypanosoma brucei. Then we have arthropod vector is this, and Anopheles mosquito, and Glossia fly. So all these this is the list of vector, this is the causative agents, and these are the diseases, different diseases. So you can go through this to understand, to remember some of the important, like dengue viruses. Then we can have Egypti mosquito, which is responsible for the dengue viruses. So diseases can be defined through the vectors borne diseases. Now, healthcare associated infection. Healthcare associated infections are infection acquired by the patients while receiving the treatment for other conditions in healthcare facilities, hospital, nursing home, clinic, same day surgery centers, outpatient facilities, and or even home health care. So these are some conditions where the healthcare associated infections may also cause, we call HAI. The former name is nosocomial infections. Basically, Latin is nosocomium. Nosocomiums is like hospital. So hospital acquired infections are the infection during the hospital stay are called a nosocomial infection, which are very common. And many escape pathogens which are responsible for the, even non-pathogens can also responsible for the nosocomial infection, because during hospital stay or intubation, patients are quite susceptible or quite prone to infection because of the low immunity and immunocompromised state. It affects 1 in 25 hospitalized patients on any day, given day, like CDC data in US, like 2 million cases per year and 70,000 plus deaths per year. They're ranked as the 8th leading cause of death. So nosocomial infection is ranked as the 8th leading cause of death after heart attack or heart diseases or cancer or a stroke. Despite sterilization, disposable materials incidence has occurred 36% in the last 20 years. So this is the global data. Now this is the table where you can see the microorganism involved in the healthcare associated infections. So if you look at these microorganisms, then most common infection types through these microorganisms, like a Coagulase negative streptococci, like bloodstream, then you have a percentage of a total infection is 11%. Then it is not reported. Then we have percentage resistance to antibiotics is not reported. Then we have the Streptococcus aureus, Staphylococcus aureus, cause of surgical wounds, 16%, 55% is resistance showing against antibiotics. So these are all different bacteria and different diseases caused by these bacteria, and the percent total infection occurs. So now this table is interesting to know about the overview about the infection spread on and healthcare diseases through hospital setting and through various other infection. Now, this is a chart showing very interesting diagram where the healthcare associated infection, this is called a principal site of healthcare associated infection. So what are the healthcare associated infection where the person is approaching to the healthcare but they got infection. So this is a very serious issue where the person is approaching for the healthcare issues for hospital, nursing homes, clinic, but they acquired secondary infection from there. So this is to be checked. So healthcare associated infections like microorganisms in healthcare associated environment like in hospital. Then you have a compromised host which are present in the hospital, and then chain of transmission from person to person, from non-living reservoir to the person. So this is called the model for the host associated infection. Now, principles, what are the different sites of the healthcare associated infection? For example, urinary tract infection is one, then surgical infection, then lower respiratory infection about 13 to 55%, right? Then we have the gastrointestinal infection, then we have a bloodstream infection. Now, if you look at the percentage of these infection, urinary tract infection is 13%. Then surgical infection is again highest, 22%. So post-surgical infections are very common. And the post-surgical infection, you may have a chances of the secondary infections from the healthcare system, from the hospital, from the nursing home. Similarly, you can have the lower respiratory infections, again 22%. So this is how you can look into an overview about the host parasite interaction through a healthcare system, through healthcare associated infection, which is very strange because the patient is going for healthcare to acquire the kind of health and to acquire the recovery from the disease, but they acquired the infection. Secondary infection or the same infection may persist for a long time. Now, what are the factors which are leading to healthcare association infection? So actually results from the interactions of three key factors. All must interact to cause infection. For example, microorganisms in the hospital environment, which are circulating. So we categorize them into two kind of pathogens or two kind of microorganisms. One is community acquired infections or microorganisms which are living in the community. So infection acquired through community. And then nosocomial infection which is acquired through hospital or through the healthcare associated infection. We call them as a healthcare associated infection. So microorganisms in the hospital environment, compromised host, chain of transmission within the hospitals, right? Now, the microorganisms in the hospitals act as a reservoir for the diverse pathogens. Opportunistic pathogens, many HAI, that is host or hospital healthcare associated infections are caused by the microbes that are harmless in healthy peoples but dangerous for the immunocompromised. So these hospital infection, for example, a person is healthy person may not acquire these infection, but the person which is immunocompromised or which is on surgery, post-surgical infection we call them, or which is in the hospital for because of some illness, some disease, some immunocompromised state, or cancer patients on high drugs or high chemotherapy which suppress the immune system may acquire these infections. So shift is causative agents over time. In 1940 to 1950, the gram-positive bacteria dominant, like Staphylococcus aureus. In 1970, gram-negative bacteria are more prevalent, that is E. coli, Pseudomonas aeruginosa. In 1980, rise of antibiotic-resistant gram-positive bacteria like Staphylococcus aureus MRSA. It's a very, very dangerous strain, cannot be controlled by antibiotic. Coagulase-negative staphylococci. It's very common. Enterococcus species. Now, in 1990, gram-positive 34% and gram-negative 32%, equally important, which is showing the resistance against antibiotics. In 2002 now to present, like in the last 25 years, major concern is antibiotic-resistant bacteria. And the bacteria which is responsible for the resistance against a particular antibiotic are against a different class of antibiotics. So, such kind of a bacteria which are pathogen as well as having resistance are very difficult to eradicate, very difficult to control, and so it may cause to the death, may damage to or decline to the health of the patient. Clostridium difficile become leading cause of the HAI, causing the pseudomembranous colitis, which is difficult to treat. So, this is all about the infection spread and infection kind of a compromise. What are the compromised host? A patient whose resistance to infection is impaired due to the illness, diabetes, cancer, burn, therapies like chemotherapies, radiation, immunosuppressive drugs, invasive procedures, and then defense breakdown like impaired innate immunity, skin, mucous membrane, phagocytosis, reduced adaptive immunity like B and T cell functions, invasive devices like catheter, ventilation or ventilators, IV lines, and some endeavoring devices, bypass, implant are the normal barriers. So, because these are the compromised hosts where the disease infection chances are more. Chain of transmission in hospital. Pathogen is spread easily in healthcare setting through multiple routes like contact transmission, direct staff, patients to patient, staff to patients, indirect via fomites like catheters, ventilators, dwelling devices, bedding, surgical cots, and other things. Vehicle transmissions like contaminated water, food, IVs, and drugs. Airborne transmissions, droplet, nuclei, and dust, and like TB and measles. Vector-like transmissions like very rare, but insects like arthropods inside the facilities can spread the pathogens within the hospital. And prevention of HAI. Healthcare associated infections, how to prevent. So, despite high risk, are largely preventable with the strict protocols, aseptic techniques like blisters. We have Semmelweis, hand hygienes, antisepsis, hand hygienes, alcohol-based rubs, sanitizers, frequent washing hands before you handle the patient, personalized gloves like protections like a personal protective equipment like gloves, gown, mask, eye and protection, sterilization, disinfections, and proper antibiotic uses, timely manners, isolation procedures. You keep containment, isolation like TB, MRSA strains, which is contagious in nature. Monitoring and surveillance, hospital infection control committees track outbreaks. Single use of disposable items, reduce cross contamination. So if you have like disposable items, things to be autoclavable, things should be properly autoclaved, sterilized, disinfectant are used properly, cell protection. So all these things can break the transmission chain in the hospital setting or in the especially healthcare associated infection can be protected. I think with this we end this lectures, and I think we'll talk about the antibiotic resistance in my next lecture. Thank you very much.